This is my review of the Arcam A25 Integrated amplifier, one that I think is very nicely styled and that features a built-in DAC, phono stage and headphone amplifier, and it costs just under £1,500. And the Arcam has really had me thinking about the importance of hi-fi system building, but really the importance of finding our own personal hi-fi happiness. And that is because when I looked at the market to see what other integrated amplifiers are available around this price, there's so many to choose between. I think it would be very confusing for newcomers and still a little bit confusing to more seasoned audiophiles. And I think it could be very powerful for someone like me to sit here and tell you that this is the one that you should buy. It's the best one. It's better than another brand, out there that costs more money. But really, hi-fi is not really that simple. And I think finding your own personal hi-fi happiness is really just not that simple. And that's so very relevant here with the Arcam A25. If there is an audio brand that I have a soft spot for, it probably would be Arcam. And I think that is because I've spent so many hours with their AV products with all my calibration work. But also it's because I do like the sound of their Class G amplifiers. And whenever I listen to one, they do always have some emotional impact on me. And maybe that is because, and I had to remind myself of this, the first ever video review I made on this channel was for an Arcam, the P49 stereo power amplifier, dating back to May 2017. And it's really quite funny to see this video now because it's pure cringe really, but we all have to start somewhere. But more recently, I had their SA30 integrated amplifier here that I bought with my own money, but that was still back in September 2022. And I've got to be honest, I didn't love the SA30. I did like the amplifier in it, again Class G, and it was great that it featured direct live, but I didn't love how the amplifier looked, the way it was built, the screen, or the DAC. So as a whole, the package didn't really work for me. Roll on some time and the new Arcam Radia series, I'm really glad to say, has fixed a lot of the gripes I had with the SA30, most notably being the styling. It is a huge improvement and it's so much more modern and nice, and I can see the colour yellow splitting opinion, but it's certainly bold, and from certain angles you see the yellow more than others, so really it's just more of an accent. The build quality seems much better to me too. There is a more solid feeling about the A25 without the same clunkiness that the SA30 had when you pressed the buttons on the front panel. And the A25 is still slimline, so easy to accommodate in or on some furniture rather than needing a dedicated hi-fi rack. I think it's also really cool how the screen is hidden behind the front panel, because the screen is very similar to the SA30s from memory, which wasn't the best attribute about it. So being hidden to some degree does give the amplifier more of a fresh look. The two control knobs, one for volume, one for input selection, I do really like how the yellow glow, or their halo, makes them pop, and you can control that brightness. The resistance of both is a little loose, especially for the volume, but it's okay. And I think most people will control everything from the remote control anyway, and gone is another of my gripes with Arcam of old, the massive generic remote control. Now we have a more sleek and simple remote that does the job very well. Although I didn't find it obvious what all the buttons do from their symbols, I had to play with it to get familiar with it. With one quirk being that with the remote control, when you press left and right to select between the different inputs, you then have to select like the OK button to engage that input. Otherwise, it just goes back to where you was before. And that feels very different to other hi-fi products that you normally just select the input and it auto changes. So that took me a little bit of muscle memory to get used to. And at first, I did find that a little frustrating. And this is the same with the control on the front of the A25, left and right to select the input you want, and then you push the button in to engage it. Around the back, it's a very simple affair with a nice layout of 3 analog inputs plus the moving magnet phono stage input. I do like how all the analog cables and connections are kept far away from the power. Then in the middle are several digital inputs for using the built-in DAC. And I was very surprised to see USB-C and not USB Type B, which is far more common for hi-fi products. And this is such a strange one because I know these days USB-C, of course, is generic. Everything has to have USB-C, but that's not the case for hi-fi. So this is definitely something to be mindful of because it's different to everything else pretty much. But does it matter? Not really. One thing that will matter to some people will be the omission of a HDMI ARC connection. I know that is important to a lot of people, so that might be a deal breaker for you straight away, but of course, not for everyone. And I did take the lid off to look inside, and the first thing I spotted was the big transformer surrounded by what looks like some kind of shield maybe. And that was impressive to see. And I'm no engineer, but there is definitely some interesting things about this amplifier's design, especially with what looks like 2 different sized transistors maybe. And if that is not what this is, I apologize, but that is what it looks like to me. Overall, this feels like a more simplistic design maybe compared to some others that I have looked inside, but that might be just because there is only 1 heatsink and not 2 that I'm more used to seeing. In hindsight, I should have looked to get a shot of the DAC chip on camera, which is an ESS Sabre 9280A Pro chip. So not the very latest and greatest chip, but we all know that is not always most important with a product like this. I find it's more important how the whole system has been balanced to sound, and that is very well judged here. And the Arcam A25 is a Class G integrated amplifier, which is Arcam's hybrid way of combining Class A sound with Class AB efficiency, which sounds great on paper, excuse the pun. And it can deliver 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 165 watts per channel into 4 ohms, so a very healthy amount of power. So really the Arcam is shaping up to be a great value for money hi-fi product, depending on if you like the sound quality, of course. And that's what's really interesting. Back to what I said before about there being so much competition at the price point. And with the Arcam costing just under £1,500, of course that sits right in the middle of the magic £1,000 price level and £2,000 right in the middle. And there's so many other amplifiers and competition at both price points. So really the challenge for the Arcam is to do enough to justify to you to spend extra on it, but it also has to do enough to justify you not to need to spend any more on one of its competitors. So confusing, so interesting, and such a tough challenge. And that is what I have been testing.
I should have known better, I should have known better that I'd lose. I should have known better. Tell me that this wasn't all for nothing. I should have known better than I did. I should have known.
For sound quality, the A25 is a very easy integrated amplifier for me to clarify its sound to you. And that is because it sounds warm, it sounds quite bold, it sounds quite rich, and it sounds quite lush. What's interesting about that is it does all of that warm, lush, rich sound without darkening off the treble too much. And that is an important distinction between it and other warmer sounding amplifiers. However, there are some trade-offs to that warmer, richer, lusher sound. It's not the most clean, clear cut in terms of its soundstage. The bass is a little bloomed and a little thick, and also it's not the fastest or most kind of lively, energetic sounding integrated amplifiers. However, it's still pretty good in all of those areas. So it's doing a lot of things right. However, it's certainly leaning kind of one way with its sound quality. And again, this is where preference starts to really come in. And also speakers, because the speakers you choose to use with the Arcam, I think will be very important and part of that all-important system building. And Arcam being a part of the Harman group means they have a close relationship with JBL and Revel speakers. And I know Arcam used JBL speakers for testing the A25 because they told me so recently. So maybe that is a great pairing recommendation for you straight off the bat. I don't have any JBL speakers here, so I used two totally different speakers, the Mission 770 and the Revival Audio Sprint 4. Both excellent speakers, but very different. And for comparisons, I tested against two different solid-state integrateds, both that cost about £500 more. The Cambridge Audio EXA 100 and the Audiolab 9000A. And they are both Class AB amplifiers, if that matters to anyone. My first comparison was using the Mission 770 speakers, and really it was no surprise to me that I preferred both the Audiolab and Cambridge amplifiers with the Missions. And of course, you would expect the Audiolab to work really well with the Missions because those products are from the same camp really. But the reason I preferred the Cambridge integrated amplifier was because it has a more clean-cut, clear-cut, lively, energetic, like uplifting, more dynamic type of sound. And I think that just works better with the Mission speakers that have a darker, slightly thicker, slightly richer type of sound characters. So adding some life and some dynamics and excitement and trying to lift, elevate their sound some, I think works best with them. I still did like the Arcam with the Missions, just not quite so much. And yes, I could have lived with it, but I think I would have spent the extra £500 for either the Cambridge or the Audiolab. But doing this test didn't really feel fair to the Arcam to me, or maybe I just didn't give it the best opportunity to shine. After spending time with the Revival Audio Sprint 4 speakers and how clean-cut, clear, lively and more neutral sounding they are compared to the Missions, these seem like the ideal speakers to give the Arcam a great chance to shine. So I did some extensive listening to this pairing over a few days, and I'm really glad I did because the Arcam's charm really started to rub off on me. And it's not a perfect integrated, we can't expect that, but it does have some standout strengths, one being it has quite a lush sound. So some of my music favourites like Lady Blackbird, Black Acid Soul, or Dominique Feels a Me sounded really nice with this system because the bold and rich and warm Arcam sound helped to make big female vocals sound richer and sweeter and more big and bold in my room, and I was really digging that. And a new album, Discovery, Steve Morrison Live at the Basement, I think it's called. You'll definitely want to give that album a play because it's got some fantastic, really nicely recorded like crowd ambience and fantastically recorded instruments. That was sounding particularly good through the Arcam, again, because like that bolder sound was helping those instruments sound more big and bold and solid in my room. And I just like that sound presentation. And I was enjoying this sound because the balance of the clean, clear, focused, excellent soundstage in Sprint 4, now with the full, warm and slightly thick and bloomed sound of the Arcam, balanced really nicely overall and was really engaging to listen to across a wide selection of music. And one thing I definitely noticed and I was appreciating is that sometimes when you have like a slightly bloomed, warmer sound, it can just be like thick congestion. But actually I was appreciating there was quite a bit of harmonic, or what came across as like harmonic information coming through from the Arcam in those kind of warmer, kind of thicker areas of the music. Not all music, just in some music. And it stood out to me. It's like, wow, that's really interesting and fun. And it made me think of, or maybe the Arcam just has just a tiny little bit of a valve amplifier sound. And I say that because not long before that, I was listening to the Galleon TS34 valve amplifier you can see down there on the rack. So I'm not saying the Arcam sounds like a valve amplifier, it definitely doesn't, but maybe just a tiny little bit, and I don't mind that at all. And what surprised me most was that all of this was still there when I changed from the high-end, external, expensive HiFi Rose RD160 DAC to the built-in ESS DAC, which sounded so much better than I expected it to. And I want to give the Arcam engineers full kudos here because the internal DAC balances with the amplifier, I think, great. And this was an Achilles heel for me with the SA30, but it's not now with the A25. I really like the built-in DAC of the A25 because it plays to its strengths of that big, bold, warm sound. And there are 3 different DAC filter modes, but I preferred the stock setting from the 3. But do factor in, I've been doing all of this testing using a very high quality digital source, the HiFi Rose RS130, and that does make a difference to the overall sound of a system. So after several days of listening to the Arcam with the Revival Sprint 4 that you can see behind me, I think it had won me over, and I was really enjoying and appreciating it for what it does really well. Of course, I still had to compare it against the Cambridge and the Audio Lab using their built-in DACs. And I started with the Cambridge, and this was actually the only comparison I needed to do, because nearly everything I preferred about the Cambridge with the Missions, I still preferred with the Sprints, with one big exception and one small one. The Cambridge sounded clearer and more focused. Individual instruments cut through the soundstage with better clarity. The bass was tighter and everything in the music was more organised, more focused, more positioned in space. So this was technically the better sound from, I think, a technically better amplifier. Bear in mind it costs £500 more. However, the lush sound that I'd been enjoying about the Arcam, the thicker, slightly bolder, warmer sound, that was definitely gone. So with the Cambridge in the system, there was more clarity. There was technically a better sound. Everything's more focused and organised, but it was also a little more dry. And not terribly so, but a little more, and obviously so, after I'd spent several days with the Arcam. And this is where we start to get into the important, subtle, not subtle, differences between hi-fi products and how you like music to be presented, because I can see some people preferring the Arcam for that warmer sound, sacrificing some clarity for the warmer sound and keeping £500 in their pocket. So it would be very easy for me to sit here and say one is outright better than the other, one is technically better than the other, but I can't guarantee which one you'll definitely prefer with your speakers in your room. And that is why I started the video as I did. Because music is an emotional, personal listening experience that you can't just simply put into numbers or scores or from simple data alone. In summary then, I like the Arcam A25 and how this is a clear step forward from the SA30 I owned a few years ago in many important ways, and I can see it being a great choice for some people who are looking for a warmer sounding amplifier. And that is especially true, I think, if you are what I would class as a medium volume listener, because I did like the Arcam a lot at around kind of medium to loud volumes. I'm a loud listener, but medium to loud, it sounded really nice there because that's where that full warm sound, I think, helps to keep music rich, when sometimes with amplifiers you feel you need to turn the volume up more to achieve that kind of bolder sound. Something to think about maybe. And that is again where I think where it reminds me a little bit of a valve amplifier, because that's one of the benefits you get from them, and also an amplifier like Musical Fidelity's A1. But of course, valves and the A1 both generate a lot of heat. You don't have that here with the A25. Like I said, it's more flexible for how you might install it within furniture. And I just like what Arcam are doing here with their new products, and the A25 is definitely lit a little fire of excitement in me to get my hands, hopefully soon, on their new biggest integrated amplifier, the SA45, that I saw this time last year at the Munich high-end show. So I'm hoping to get my hands on that amplifier soon. And I hope this review has helped you to either shortlist the A25 or not. And if you've enjoyed this review, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, because I am working on more.